Welcome back everyone to my final recap of this year's FIDE World Cup. I got knocked out by Grandmaster Yangyi from China in the tiebreak, but it was a huge fight and I'm really excited to tell you about it. I got knocked out in the third segment of the tiebreak, so I'm really happy overall that I managed to, or at least I think that I managed to deliver a great match. Against an extremely formidable opponent. I've already said that before. I think his highest rating was 2765. He's been in the top 10 in the world for, I believe, numerous amounts of times and has been a top player for many years. So I'm really happy and quite content with my performance overall. Of course, it would have been a sensation if I would manage to get to the next round, but obviously I was also sort of lucky in the first match not to lose the first game. I was also kind of lucky in the classical portion against Yangyi. Not only lucky, I think I also defended those bad positions quite well. But overall, I'm more happy than disappointed about my performance in general. But now it's time to have a look at some of the games. We will go through all of them to some extent, probably not as much in detail as we did in the classical games, but still to have sort of an overview of what happened in this match overall. So in the first segment, it was 15+10. I had the white pieces in the first game, and I was actually able to win that game, which obviously put him under immense pressure since he had to come back in the game after that. So let's see how I managed to pull that off. I went for d4 in I think all of the games in the faster time controls. Since I did not really get anywhere in the classical game with e4, he just has a better understanding of those positions, and that's what I realized. I was fortunate to have enough time in the classical game to be able to defend this pretty bad position I was in, but in faster time controls I was not fully confident to enter those. Also, he's extremely solid in the Petrov, which maybe he would have gone for in the Rapid and Blitz. So I decided it would be maybe a better choice to go for d4. He played knight f6, I went c4, e6, knight f3, and here he went for b6 for the Queen's Indian. I played a3, which is a line which I've already played in some games. He went bishop b7, now knight c3, so this is the whole point of going a3, to prepare knight c3 without allowing black to go bishop b4. He played d5, and now I went for this move bishop f4, which I think is pretty rare, at least compared to the main moves, which are c takes d5 and bishop g5. But it's a playable line, pretty solid overall. And he went bishop e7, which I did not fully know anymore, even though it's extremely logical. Obviously, I also had to prepare other lines, not only the Queen's Indian. I think what I was mostly looking at was d takes e4 and bishop d6 here. So he went bishop e7, which is of course very logical, e3 short castle, and now rook c1. I'm actually curious if I should have done anything else, maybe taken on d5 also in this position. I was thinking about that, maybe that would have been better. And if he takes e takes d5 back, then I have quite a nice structure. It would of course also be playable, but I guess that this would be a bit better for white. I was thinking about knight takes d5, and then even queen takes d5. I was not fully sure about this anymore, but it looks like, objectively speaking, maybe I can take this pawn here. But obviously with faster time controls I was not, I just couldn't remember what was the best way of continuing. Also here, taking on d5 is probably the most critical approach, but I went for rook c1. Still not moving with my bishop, because then if you would take, I would need to spend another tempo. He went c5, very logical. I took on c5, b takes c5, and now we had this type of hanging pawn structure, which now is basically just around equal. Computer is showing here that knight h5 is possible, but he went knight d7. All of that was very logical. Knight b6, knight e5, protecting the pawn on c4. And after knight fd7, I was quite happy to see that, because now I managed to exchange on d5 and put my bishop to f3, and it felt quite nice for me at this point. I'm not sure what else he could do here. Maybe rook c8 is possible. But then I thought that maybe I have knight b5, and if a6, knight a7 probably doesn't do anything because he has rook c7. So maybe he should have gone for that. He can also go maybe a6 first, and then rook c8 might also be possible. But he went for that. I took on d5 and went bishop f3. Takes, queen d7, queen c2. I thought that was very natural, preparing rook d1 next. Rook ac8, rook fd1, rook fd8, and now h3 was a nice move because I'm hinting at bishop g4 as well when he would lose the exchange. So he played d4, which I thought was very principled, but it seems like this was inaccurate. Just a quick reminder here, I did not check any of the games here with the engine just yet. So I'm still sort of in the dark here. I can only see the evaluation. So bishop takes b7. This was still okay. The problem was if I go bishop g4, then, well, first of all, he can maybe repeat with queen c6 and I have to go back bishop f3 most likely. But he might also have this intermediate move d3, which I thought could even mean quite a lot of trouble for me, and only then to go queen c6. So that's why I took on b7, took on d4. And he played knight c4, which is the critical follow-up. Otherwise, if he takes on d4, I can just take back and I'm just a pawn up. And after knight c4, it seems like here I missed a nice opportunity. I went for the move knight d5. But queen e2 would have been possible instead. After which, probably he doesn't have a great way to win back the pawn, because if he takes on b2, I'm guessing I just have rook b1. And it looks like I'm winning the piece on b2. So that would have been better. Instead, I went for this move, aiming for some simplifications. Because now if he took on d5, then I can take on c4. Otherwise, I have this this exchange, which should be good for me. So he took, I took with the queen on c4, rook to d8, and now rook e1. Still also here, queen e2 would have been better. That's actually very sensible, because if c takes d4, now I have rook c7. So he has to go queen d7, it seems. And it looks like I'll also be a pawn up here. Like I'll also have somebody's with bishop g7 maybe, even though here probably he has bishop g5. So this is the line which is given here by the live engine on lead chess, and just looks like a pawn up for white. Instead I went rook e1. He took on d4, now queen c7, and now I felt like this endgame should probably be around equal. As it is, computer is also giving complete equality here. But black has some trumps, which is basically this passed pawn, which will go to d3 shortly. And I technically also have some trumps in the long run, which is that I can create a passed pawn on the queen side. So let's skip a few moves ahead. He could have basically made a draw here at any point. For example, here he could take on f4 and go d2, when this rook endgame should not. Here nothing should happen. It should just end in a draw. But he was really playing this quite ambitiously. He went bishop f6 back, rook c4, now g5, g3. I did not want him to allow to get rid of my bishop on d2 because it's blockading the pawn on d3. So I always want to be able to recapture with my pawn. So we brought both our kings, king to f5, king to f3. I think that was all very logical. And I started to advance my pawns on the queen side just to get some counterplay there. And he found this very resourceful idea to put my king into some danger with the idea of h5, h4, and then rook g7. And once rook g3 comes, it would be checkmate. So I needed to be a bit careful. I went rook c8. If he goes h4 now, I would have rook h8. He went for the exchange, rook c5, I took. Bishop c5, rook c1. And bishop d4, rook c4, again trying to stop him from going rook g7. Here he went h4, so again here this is probably can be quite a big threat, even though I might still have bishop e1, now that I think about it. But I went rook c3 to hit this pawn, and around here I was already feeling like he needs to be careful not to overpush, and this is actually exactly what happened. He went rook d5, now rook b3, and all of a sudden I felt like my play gets extremely simple, because I just aim to play a5 and b6. He doesn't really have a great way, at least I didn't see it. No real idea against that. Bishop e6 was still good. I went rook b1. I could also go a5, but here I did not like the fact that he can go for this when it would just be a simple draw. And already here I felt like there could be something in the position. So I went rook b1 first. The computer is still giving 0-0 here, but it felt very, very dangerous for him already at this point. He played bishop c7, already inaccurate. Seems like bishop c5 is better, a5 and rook d8. b6 and, well, actually what happens if I go rook b3 first? Rook g8, why can't I take here? Whew, king e2, king e4. Ah, that's tricky. And if I take here, he gets the passed pawn. And if I go b6, take, rook g8, again this checkmate idea. I still have to move bishop e1 though. And this can be one possible draw to repeat like this. I guess bishop d2. Bishop d2, maybe rook e2 is coming. Yeah, that could be dangerous. Bishop f2 is possible. And I guess that here, yeah, this is a draw, because if I promote, he can just take, but I can give checks and pick up this pawn. Should be a draw. But he went for bishop c7 here, and now I really start to get my play. a5 and b6 is coming. He made the next inaccuracy, rook d4, just b6, take. Bishop takes f4, and now it's actually lost. It looks like he has to go bishop b8, but then, well, I can maybe give a check first and then go b7. It's probably also lost and practically very unpleasant for black. But he took here. Actually, I was also thinking at this point if I should include the check, but I thought it doesn't really matter. I can do that. But yeah, taking was actually good. I took, at first actually the funny thing was here. At first I wanted to go b7, but then I realized that he has bishop takes d2. And actually I'm missing something perhaps. Because I thought rook f4 is going to be checkmate, but I still have b8 queen and it's protecting that square. So I can give a check first. King has to move and then I can promote. And if rook f4 I can just take. I missed that in the game. So is b7 also possible? I guess it just gives him the chance to go back with the bishop. So that's why I probably didn't go for that. Instead I went for the rook endgame, thinking that it should be winning. Which it also is, but later on I messed up again. So he brought his rook back. Rook has to be passive on b8, king f3. Actually here it was already quite interesting, because this is kind of the move which you're thinking about first. But first of all, I didn't have much time, and secondly I was trying to calculate this. And if my rook is on b5, I thought I'm actually not in time here. Because if I go here, I thought the pawn endgame is a draw, but maybe I missed something. I thought he's just in time to, yeah, he's just in time to get back. Yeah, this is actually a draw to go rook b5. So king f3 was still okay. King d4 is also possible. I can just cut off his king like this. Yeah, that's of course much easier. I went king f3, king g4, f5 check. I took on h4. Maybe I can also go back to f3. Maybe that's the most technical way to handle it. Again, he is in time. King d5, king f4, king c6. And I'm not in time in the pawn endgame. So that was all fine, but here king g5 was the mistake. I need to go king g3 here. And after f4, how do I win this? King g2, king e2, and then rook b2 I have. I could also, I guess, go rook e4 and rook e7. That should also be enough. Yeah, now it's I will just put him into Zugzwang and pick up this pawn at some moment. Yeah, that would have been easier, but I was already, well, I was not so low on time. Instead I went king g5, f4. And now it's a draw. I took on f4, rook b7, rook f6, but here rook b5 was the blunder. And I think after that my technique was good. He needed to go rook b1 here to get a check in from behind. And now if I go here, I guess he can just go rook h1, and it looks like he's just in time to hold here. Yeah, this was the line which is given here. But here I think I converted it pretty well, still cutting off the king. But he was very tricky still. Like also here, if I go h7, I think it's a draw because he can just check. The thing was, if he gives a check here and another check, then I thought I have king h5. which now that I think about it, what actually happens here? Also not so clear. King g6, rook g5 maybe? Oof. How does that win? Rook g5, rook g7, is that it? Rook a7? Huh. Now rook g7 he can just give checks. Ah, and then king h4. And then I have rook f7, h7. That should be winning, yeah? Difficult. All of that is difficult. He went king g4 and now rook h7 was the key move. I'm just protecting against all checks. King g5, king g7, and he resigned. So that was the first game, which I managed to win. Now let's head on to the second one, which, as you can already guess, I lost. Let's flip the board for a second. So that was actually cool because Magnus was commenting on that game on the Chess24 YouTube channel, which some friends have already sent to me. Yeah, let's go through it from the start. So he went c4 as in our classical game, knight f6, and this time he played knight c3. And I played e5, which was also my preparation for our classical encounter. The idea from this move order is that I'm not allowing this second move g3. I mean, I am allowing it, but if he goes g3 here, I have other options like c5 or c6 or e6. So I went e5, and if you would go for g3 here, then it's a bit of a different story because I can already go bishop b4 and it's going to be sort of a reversed Rossolimo. So he went knight f3, knight c6, g3, and here I played this very modern line with d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop g2 and bishop c5, which is extremely solid from the black side. Short castle, short castle. All of these ideas with knight takes e5 don't fully work because these kind of desperados always work out for black in the end. For example, if this, I don't think that this is any good for white. And taking on c6 also gives black sufficient compensation. If white takes here, there are some ideas like queen d5, for example, and white's king is going to be weak. So he went for this, castle, castle, d3, now h6. This is still sort of theory. The idea of h6 is that I'm not allowing bishop g5, which is a typical idea in this type of position. Yeah, for example, if I go rook e8, this could always be a bit unpleasant because f6 is kind of weakening this whole diagonal. So h6, now I'm preparing to also go back knight f6. Maybe I could have done that immediately, but I didn't want to allow him to gain any space with b4, even though that's typically not even such a big problem for black to allow. Yeah, a5, queen c2, now knight f6, and he went for e3, which surprised me a little bit because it is weakening the pawn on d3, but obviously his idea was to guard the d4 square. Bishop f5, rook d1, queen d7, aiming to put pressure on d3. He went knight e4, and here I actually committed a blunder, which we both completely missed. And the refutation is quite nice, as it was also pointed out by Magnus on the Chess24 stream. I took on e4, which, I mean, it does look like a blunder because of his recapture d takes e4, but this is exactly what I was hoping for, because now I can simply take on e4, and he cannot take back because then his rook on d1 is hanging. But the refutation is that he has knight takes e5, which I completely missed and he also completely missed. After knight takes e5, d takes e4, now my queen is attacked and the bishop as well, and on the next move he can just take and everything is hanging. c5 is going to be hanging, b7 is going to be hanging, and I'm just lost. So instead I should have gone just back bishop e7 or something like that and the position would be equal. But he returned the favor, and now I was actually in a great position. Computer even gives a slight edge for me, and I was feeling quite confident at this moment. But still, for the moment, I need to worry a bit about this rook on c7, which is annoying, and he has ideas to just capture on b7. I went rook f8, which felt extremely natural at this point, threatening rook d1. He went knight d2, and apparently here I started to drift off a little bit. I went rook a b8, which felt very logical. The best move a4 I've also considered. But I wasn't sure after rook takes b7, rook a c8. What wasn't I sure about actually? Huh. That's a great question. Because I was quite sure that I was thinking about this. Huh. Yeah, that's a bit strange. I really cannot recall what was my problem here. I went for rook ab8 and then went for this type of position, but now I would really already love to have this move a4 in, which I needed to spend another tempo later on. Still, I realized that it has to be enough compensation, but I need to be a bit careful not simply to end up a pawn down, which did in fact happen in the game. So I went rook d8, bishop d2, a4, and after rook c1 now I went for the, I believe, extremely natural move bishop b3. Still keeping the protection of the pawn on a4, but now I'm starting to get into quite a lot of trouble. I need to go back bishop f5, which doesn't feel so natural. Bishop e4 would feel a little bit more natural at this point, but here I'm also again in a lot of trouble because of bishop e1, and then knight d2 is also a threat next to knight takes e5. So that's why bishop f5 is the best, but here I'm already suffering a little bit. Like, he's just a pawn up and I need to be careful. Like, he can go bishop e1 or bishop c3 and just slowly consolidate. So it really was important to play more precisely earlier. Also, rook d8 was actually kind of a useless move. I can go a4 immediately and then for something like this, which again should be okay for me, but still white is the one pushing here for sure. Instead I went for this, rook d5, bishop e1, and now rook d1, going for this pretty sad endgame, which still offers some drawing chances for me actually. Even though I'm 2 pawns down, the bishop pair is quite strong, and his pawn here on the queen side is worth not so much. But I need to be, of course, very precise, and with low time it's quite difficult to hold those positions. So bishop e6, bishop c3, f6 already a big mistake, after which he has a winning advantage for some reason. f5 is better, according to the computer. So he went knight d7, bishop c7, knight c5, bishop b5. Now bishop d4 surprised me quite a lot. I thought that he would just go b4, which also the computer points out. And for this, which, yeah, still I can continue fighting here, but in the long run, white should be able to win. Even those opposite color bishop endgames with 2 pawns up should be winning in most cases. Even though I have some drawing chances there, of course. But he went bishop d4, king f7, f3, h5, king f2, bishop d6 was apparently another inaccuracy for some reason. No idea why. I just had the idea to take here. Knight e4, king e6. Here I'm not so sure. Like, if he goes for this with this pawn being on b2, this is probably a draw. He has some ideas with b4 to create an outside passer, but probably a draw. When knight c3, bishop c6, e4, now g6, king e3, f5, now e5. I thought that this could be good for me because now at least I have the light squares. I mean, good for me in the sense that I have some drawing chances, not of course in any other way. We went to h4, bishop d8, knight e2, apparently a blunder. f4 was best. I was not so sure that this would be so easy to win. Like if I go bishop a5, for example. Yeah, this is, I'm not so sure. Well, I guess if, yeah, b takes c3 might be winning. Yeah, that's probably good enough, and otherwise he'd probably bring in the king and maybe b4 at some moment. At least the computer is saying this. But he went knight e2 here. I went g5, another blunder. Bishop e8 was best, just to protect the pawn. Takes, f4, bishop d8, and after bishop a7 it's a draw again. Apparently knight c3 was best. H4, take, and this position should be winning because he brings the king, and again bishop takes c3, b takes c3 is the way. If king takes c3, bishop d5, again I'm not so sure about this. If he goes b4, en passant a4, oof. Still, even with the computer, yeah, probably it's lost because he's just advancing the pawn. Probably it's lost, yeah. But b takes c3 should be winning as well. But he went bishop a7, and now I get king d5. And whenever knight c3 comes, I get king c4. Knight d4, bishop d7, knight f3, king c4, bishop d4, king d5, knight g5, and here I committed the blunder, bishop takes g5. I sort of realized that it's losing, but I made the move that because I just had 3 seconds on the clock, Then after the game, I didn't have an engine, but I thought that bishop e8 might be the best way to defend. Let me check if that was the case. Yeah, bishop e8, and still, objectively, it's probably a draw, but I'm not sure that I would have been able to hold this anyway, because it's extremely difficult. White has still so many ideas to do something, and I just need to sit and be extremely precise. I went for this. Oh, wow, I have this idea, f4. G takes f4, h4. But it's anyway lost most likely. It's just way too many pawns. King f3, bishop f5, king g3, for example, king e6, and at some moment b4 is going to come and just start pushing the a pawn. So instead I wanted to play king e6 here, but I lost on time, and anyway it wouldn't have mattered because after king f4 I'm in Zugzwang basically. If I move with the bishop, then he goes b4, a takes b3, a4, and I'm just lost. So quite a painful game, especially considering the match situation. If I would have been more precise here and maybe spent a little bit more time and went for a4, the match could have ended at this point already. Because after a4, after a4, rook b7, rook c8, I'm basically just better. He has to be very careful not to be in a lot of trouble. I even saw this idea with knight a5, knight b3 on many occasions, but just couldn't, yeah, for some reason didn't go for that. So let's have a look at the next segment, which ended in 2 draws. I had the white pieces again in the first game. And this time my opponent went for the Queen's Gambit, like we did in our classical game when I had the black pieces. And he went for the Semislav, which again came as a surprise to me. So I went for c takes d5, which is a very slow approach, and immediately also got a pretty bad position. I had this very small idea prepared with queen b3, which I had a look at some time ago, but I couldn't fully remember any of the details. I think my original idea was actually to start with queen b3. Quick spoiler there. The idea is basically that I just want to stop him from developing the bishop on c8. There is the same idea with queen c2, but then he has g6 and bishop f5. And with queen b3, the actual idea behind this is that after queen b6, I should go back queen c2, and then the queen on b6 is not always so great there. But I started with this, which I guess gives him the chance to play h6 and bishop f5, when now queen b3 he can actually go queen b6, which is going to be very similar to the game. But yeah, we had this, now queen b6, and as I said, I need to go for queen c2 here, when I think I have some chances to play for very, very slight edge. But of course it's very, very minimal anyway. I went for e3 instead, and now he gets bishop f5, so now he's comfortably equalized. Bishop e2, knight d7. He of course can take at any moment on b3. A takes b3, and those pawns can be weak, but they can also be an asset. If I get b4 and then install a knight to c5, it can be nice, or if I get b4, b5. And yeah, the position should anyway be balanced also here. He played bishop d6, and now I played this very strange move g3. I realized that it's probably not great, but I was just feeling like g3, bishop f4 looks kind of interesting, so I just went for it. Instead, I guess I should go for, I don't know, something like g4 seemed quite reasonable as well. I thought the position should be equal, but Black has probably the more comfortable side, because he just has a very great version of the cast. But also now I'm in kind of a strange situation, because he has ideas to play h6, bishop h4, g5, and then after bishop g3 he can take, which maybe is not a big deal anyway. Maybe I could go for something like this and just allow that to happen. When I get the open FL, that would certainly have been a more principled approach. Yeah, I went g3 with the idea to bring back the bishop to f4, which I did here. Bishop takes f4, and here I took on b6 first, which of course opens up the a file for him. But what I didn't like is that here maybe he keeps the queens on the board and then goes g5. I was quite worried about my king here. So I took a b6, g takes f4, and now of course I'm in quite a lot of trouble. But also in this game, again, I think I defended pretty well to some extent. Of course, he increased his advantage at some point, but then when it came down to it, I found some good defensive moves. So king e7, king g3. Obviously, I'm in a bad position. Yeah, this pawn on h3 is bad. His pieces are great. He took on f3. Bishop takes f3, f5. Now a4, I think that was already a good move, not to allow him to play b5, and I will have some ideas later on to play b4 as I did in the game as well. So then I played b4, rook h8, rook h1, knight e4, now a5, apparently a mistake. My idea was to now take on e4, which I did in the game, and if he takes d takes e4 now, then I have rook takes a5 with some counterplay on the 5th rank. But he took f takes e4, now I took b takes a5, g4, and unfortunately I cannot take now because after he takes back, then my rook on h1 is just hanging. So I went rook hb1, having to sacrifice this pawn, king h2, rook to h7 back, rook b6, rook f8, rook a2, hanging on to the pawn on f2. My position is lost at this point, but I don't think the win is so simple. He played rook g7, now a6, and here he made the mistake b takes a6. And I had a very strong defensive resource, rook c2. Instead, it looks like rook g2 was winning for him. I can never take because he can just go back and then it's going to be checkmate, but I didn't see the win after king h1. Looks like he takes now, rook a6, rook c8, but it looks like it should transpose back to the game, I think, or it's going to be at least very similar. Because this was the position in the game. That was actually a mistake. I need to go back rook b1 for some reason. Now king e6, rook c2, king f5, rook b8, and king e6 mistake. He needs to go rook f7. I guess preparing king g4, king f3. And what happens if I take this pawn? I guess he just takes on f2. The rook f7 would have been the winning move here. Instead he went king e6, and now I was able to get enough counterplay and just win back the pawn on h3. Rook g7, now of course I cannot take immediately because it would be checkmate. But instead I took on c6 and rook c8. I was actually feeling already like it could go wrong for him at this point because, well, for example, if he gives 2 checks, it actually won't be another check. But well, also this is just a draw. Probably I don't have anything better than to repeat. So this is how the game then ended. I could also just give checks. That's also possible. But I even felt like maybe I have some ideas here. Rook c5, rook g5, king h2. Like if I win this pawn, of course it's still a draw, but at least I can pretend to do something. But I was not in time to do that, and just everything came off the board, and we continued to play on until the end when it was a stalemate. So that meant that the second tiebreak was starting off with a draw, and the second game also ended with a draw. Now let's have a look at that one. So he again went for c4. Let me flip the board real quick. I went knight f6 again, and we repeated the same opening moves. He went d3, and now I went for d5. So d3 is kind of another approach for white to sidestep the theory and just get a game. And after d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, now e4. Very similar to a Najdorf, just that the knight is on c3. Black has quite a few options here, but I've already prepared this line for the classical portion because he did have one game with d3 already. To simply take on c3 and then play bishop d6. I thought that was a very simple approach. Of course, white does have this potentially good center, but I'm just very solid. And whenever he goes d4, he's also creating some weaknesses. We went bishop e2, castle, short castle, h6. I think around here my preparation ended. The idea is if white goes a5 here, I can just go b6, and this position would just be equal here. So we went bishop e3. Generally, black does also have some ideas to push f5. That would also be possible, like king h8 followed by f5 is another idea. So a4, bishop d7, bishop e3, now queen e7. Rook e1, b6, I think that was all very natural. Rook e8, rook d8, I played pretty quickly this game. Rook e1, bishop c5. Now it's important that he cannot go d4 here, because I can take and go bishop e4, at least that's what I thought in the game. And then both this rook is hanging and the pawn on e4 as well. So he went bishop f1, and here I actually committed a mistake, which is bishop takes e3. For some reason. I'm not sure why. I can guess why. I mean, he took back with rook. Another interesting move is here f takes e3. Those structures tend to be also quite interesting for white, then to push d4 and sometimes activate the bishop to c4 and then d5. I thought that was also an interesting idea. So taking is generally apparently not right. Computer says that bishop d6 is the best move, so that means that bishop c5 was already not the right approach. Queen f6, I guess. Now bishop f1 could run into bishop h3. And it seems like the position is kind of in a mutual, like both sides probably don't have many ideas. Whenever white goes d4, it could create some weaknesses. Like here, I could take back, and queen g6 would mean trouble for him. So yeah, knight a5 would be probably a more interesting move at this point, just to prepare to go c5, because d4 still doesn't work, because I can take and then take on e4. That's probably the cleanest move here, when yeah, I'm certainly not in any danger here. White probably has to be a bit careful not to be worse. But in the game I took rook e3, queen a3, and here he played rook e1, d4 he has to do. And I guess what he missed was that after knight a5, knight takes e5, bishop takes a4, he has queen c1. And I guess that's also probably what the computer is saying. What is the problem? No, it actually isn't. Like, it's just playable. White should give this pawn. That's very, very strange. And here he's giving some advantage to white. Poof. For some reason, like, I'm a pawn up. It looks very solid for black. He just goes rook c1 next. Knight h4, knight f5, rook g3. Yeah, very difficult. Instead, he went rook e1, knight a5. By the way, what I was talking about now, this knight takes a5, bishop a4, queen c1, I was considering that in the game as well, and I was a bit worried. But it seems like I'm just very comfortable here if I take and go c5. That's an important move though. Otherwise, if white can consolidate his center with f4, he's just better. But here, he's not in time. But he went back, knight a5, rook a1, and here we repeated the moves and settled for draw. In hindsight, I could have played on. I had a bit more time, and I also realized that here I can play c5. After which all three results are possible, but probably I have the slightly preferable position. I was just not sure about d4 here. Let me see how it goes on. Take, c takes d4. Knight takes d4. I have queen f6 simply. It's not the only move though. Of course, in hindsight, you're always smarter, and I should have played on because yeah, I lost a match, and maybe this could have turned it around, but of course it could have also gone any other way. I saw it like this, that, well, in the Blitz, I also have my chances. If the time decreases, so can his mistakes can also increase. Of course, mine can too, but kind of the rating advantage and playing strength advantage, which he has, probably is not so important in Blitz. At least that was kind of my strategy. So I'm actually recording this a couple of hours later. It's now 2:40, let me check, 2:43 a.m. I thought I would record the rest tomorrow. I actually recorded everything once, but again, for some reason the audio cut off and I didn't notice, and so basically the rest of the footage was completely useless without the audio. So I'm recording everything again now, since I just cannot fall asleep because of all of the excitement from the tiebreak. And I want you guys to have the recap also tonight, which maybe some of you will still be up in Europe and would like to watch my take on the match. So we are now at the final leg of the tiebreak, the 5+3 segment. In the first game, I drew the black colors, and Yangyi for the first time chose to go e4, which probably was a good decision, since he did not really get far in his 1c4 endeavors, at least speaking about opening advantages. And in this game, he did have quite some pressure out of the opening. I went for e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5, and I went for my Berlin with knight f6. He went d3, and I went for d6. In hindsight, maybe I should have played more principled my other move, bishop c5 here, but anyway, I got a very playable position out of the opening anyway. I went for d6, c3, bishop d7, short castle, and now the setup with g6. If you're carrying the bishop to the queen side, to the king side, rook e1 now, bishop g7. I think all of those moves were very standard at this moment. I was yeah, I played rook e8, which is anyway a normal move, but I think you're supposed to go h6 here, because rook e8 does allow white to play this bishop g5, h6, bishop h4 when this pin is a little bit annoying, and g5 would weaken the f5 square, so I don't want to go for that either. But I managed to come up with this interesting solution, knight a5, which exchanges these bishops, and now at least I'm out of this pin. But of course, now I'm kind of stuck with this passive bishop on g7. And he made a nice decision to get rid of his own bishop now, because otherwise I would be happy to play knight h5, and then his own bishop is not doing so much on h4 anymore. So he took knight e3, bishop g7. Still, my position is solid enough, but white for sure has some slight pull here, strategically speaking. He went a4, gaining space on the queen side. I think all of that was very natural. Queen b3, now knight d8 was, I think, quite a nice maneuver, trying to get the knight to e6, because as it typically is in those structures, the knight on c6 is not really doing so much, especially with those pawns on c3 and b4. So knight d8, rook 81. Here I went c6. I also had some other alternatives. I was looking at b5 as well, which was possible, but I did not want to give him any options on the a file, even though I could probably go knight e6 and have sufficient active play with knight f4 to come. I could also go knight e6 immediately. This was the line which I showed earlier in my first recording. This is the line which the computer gave when, yeah, it's around equal, something like this. b7 will also drop, but I do have some threats on the king side. But I went c6, now knight c4, queen c7, obviously needing to parry the threat of knight b6. He played a5 to fix my queen side, very logical. Knight e6, now d4. Rook 88, knight to b6, and here I would have had more active continuation than what I played in the game. I played knight f8 back, aiming to maybe play knight d7 to exchange the knight, or also to take on d4 at the right moment, but I could have actually done that immediately. But what I missed here, that after d5, e takes d5, I have to move knight takes d4. I was only looking at e takes d5 when after knight takes d5 I did not really see a great continuation here. Just looks like a pawn down. Maybe I can even play this, and maybe I can win back this pawn, but I wasn't fully sure about that. But I can take on d4, and not rook e7, but the line I wanted to show was that if he takes here and takes on d4, I can just take here and he cannot take back because of rook e1 checkmate. But I went knight f8, he went d5. Now knight d7, I have to get rid of this strong knight on b6. He took rook d7, d takes c6, now b takes c6, probably important, because if I would take with the queen, it's also possible, but it just feels wrong with this weakened d5 square, and my bishop is just not such a great piece here. So therefore b takes c6, played h3, and I would have had some opportunities to play d5 on numerous occasions. This was one of them, which would have equalized on the spot basically. I don't know why I didn't go for that. This looks fairly simple, and yeah, I'm very active here. Maybe e4 can come at the right moment. This pawn is also a bit weak. Yeah, but I went for queen b7. Now queen a4, and still d5 would have worked. But at this point I was a little bit worried about some ideas with c4. The point being that d4 does not work because of rook takes d4. When I cannot take back with this rook because the rook on e8 is hanging, I cannot take back like this because the rook on e8 is still hanging. But I would have to move rook c8 in this position, which I did not see, just very calm. And if knight takes e5 now, then I can at least take back and then take on c4, when I'm certainly not the one who needs to be careful anymore. But I went rook b8, knight to d2, which was a nice move, trying to get the knight to c4, queen b5, queen takes b5, and now I probably chose the worst of all recaptures, rook takes b5. I was mostly looking at a takes b5 as well, but I didn't simply like the fact that he has the outside passer. Probably the best is just to take c takes b5. But after knight f1 I sort of stopped, because I thought this knight is ending up on d5 and then it just looks terrible for me. But even if that's the case, it's not so sure how white can even make progress. Maybe I can put my bishop to h6 later, and maybe the rook to c6 should be quite solid for me as well. But the computer finds this move d5 here, which is also quite natural, but still, like rook takes d5 here, I do have some active possibilities. If knight e3 then e4, for example, Rook d1 also e4, but still after d5, knight e3, white is certainly the one who is pushing here. This knight on d5 is just incredibly strong and annoying as well. But I took back with the rook. He played knight c4, bishop f8, rook d3. And at first I was banking on some active play with f5, but then I realized that I cannot do that because he can just take on e5 here. So I went rook d8, rook ed1, and now c5. So that's why I also put back the rook so that I'm not running into knight b6 with the tempo. Like the problem was here, if c5, I thought that this just looks very terrible for me. Now b4 is protected and the knight is beautiful on d5. So I played c5 here, he played knight a3, rook to b8, b takes e5. Now it looks like I'm just losing one pawn and probably the other one as well. But I found this defense, rook b c8, now c takes d6, and then rook c6, and I'm actually winning back the pawn on d6 because of this pin on the knight on a3, which would be hanging if he goes d7. There was actually an interesting line which I was looking at earlier. If white goes rook d5, I should actually go bishop e7 here. And knight c4 does not yield anything to white, because here I'm actually not any worse at all, because a5 is going to be weak always as well, and white cannot really make any progress. But the cool thing was c takes d6, and now I have this trick, and in the end I have rook takes e3, and the knight is actually trapped, because if he goes knight to b1, I have rook c1, picking up the knight, which will lead to something very similar than to what happened in the game. In the game he took rook c6, knight to c2, and then we got this rook endgame right here, knight b4. He should probably go for that, otherwise if we can consolidate and keep my bishop, I shouldn't have many difficulties. If I pick up the pawn, a5 will be weak. So he went for this. I took, went rook c4, and f3, the best try for him, sort of the only try to hold on to the pawn on e4, rook takes b4, rook d6, and he now gets another pawn on a6, or he wins the pawn on a6, which now results in a very interesting rook endgame. So 4 versus 4, and white has the extra a pawn. I recently read a book by Chereshevsky on this famous endgame book, where he also analyzed exactly this endgame. But well, in a blitz game, especially with 12 seconds on the clock, I could not fully recall all of the details. So I just made some logical moves: rook a4, rook takes a6, rook to a2, h4. Now apparently h5 is a mistake. Apparently g5 is the best move. Very strange. Typically you always like to place your pawns like this. But anyway, he made some mistakes after that as well. Of course, it's a blitz game. Rook a check, king g7, a6. Apparently another mistake, but this is all very mysterious. Now I should give some checks with rook a1, and after king f2 another check. So the thing is, I should not let his king out easily. Like if he goes here, then I can continue waiting, I think. Or actually f5 was the whole idea. Black has to play concretely here. Otherwise, if... well, I'm actually curious, why not rook a2 in this position? Huh. Well, then maybe again a7. Yeah, I was already looking at this endgame quite a bit before. Let me just show you how the game went, because this was incredibly instructive. So I played king f6, he went a7, king g7, and I thought that he doesn't really have any way to win this now with the pawn on a7, because whenever he comes with the king, I will just give checks once he reaches the b6 square. But it turns out that he's probably that he should be winning this with precise play. He started with g4, which was objectively a mistake, because I have the move g5, but this is very difficult, like, to understand that this endgame is a draw with rook a2. 2 pawns down, but I'm just way too active on the second rank. Instead I went king f6, and now we reach this endgame. He played g5, which I thought now with the pawn on a7 is probably a draw, because, as I said, whenever the king reaches b6, I will always start giving checks, but white actually has a very nice way to win the endgame, which he did not find. Let me just quickly show you. So he brought the king. There's nothing I can do. Whenever I go away with the rook from the a file, then he can just move the rook and promote. So I have to wait passively like this. And whenever king d6 comes, I play rook a5, protecting the pawn. This was my whole defensive idea. And yeah, now I didn't see how he can win this, because even if he gets the exact same position with black to move, I still have the move king h7. So while having a look at this earlier, first time recording, I figured out white's winning way, which is, as I said, very instructive. So white should go here, king c7, for example. This was the line I was looking at earlier. King d6, how was it again? Yeah, this is what you need to reach. King h7, exactly the position we had earlier. And now the thing was that he has to go not rook e8, this was one option. But rook e8 was funny because after rook takes a7, rook e7, first of all I have to move rook a6 check. But the interesting line was even here I can take, and after king e7 I have king g7. And here even white needs to be careful not to end up losing, because after king d6 I have f6, threatening to take and then just queen. So he needs to take and then go f4, and then some queen endgame will come out where black is up a pawn. I think when I checked it, it was not like this. How was it? King f7, I think. King d7, now f3. Yeah, this was the line. And in the end, white is going to suffer quite a lot. It's, practically speaking, probably very difficult to defend. That was just a nice line to point out, because we will see exactly this position earlier with black to move when it's going to be lost. Let me just quickly figure out how it was. So this is what you need to reach here. King d6 and king h7, and now you need to play king c6 with white. Now king b6 is a threat, like if king g7, king b6, now you don't have the checks. Rook needs to go back, and then white is just again queening on the next move. So the rook needs to go back immediately, and then white has rook d8. This is the whole winning idea. And after rook takes a7 now, then rook d7. So basically the same idea as earlier, going into the pawn endgame, but with better circumstances. And also now if rook a6, there's king b5 or king b7. And on the next move, f7 will fall. And the funny thing is that here in this endgame, of course, whenever king g7 comes, then white plays king e7, and then it's winning, because then king moves, king f6, and white picks up the pawn and wins the pawn endgame easily. So that was very instructive for me as well to figure that out in the analysis. But my opponent did not find that. He played rook b8 and just went into this endgame, which is of course a dead draw, and I defended that very well for a long time. There's not much point in showing all of the moves now. Yeah, he played around as long as possible here, then started pushing the pawns. Just a dead draw, and for many moves I was holding on really well. Just nothing happened here. Then at some moment he decided to give up the pawn, sort of the only last try he can do here. And I can basically play anything here. Even the pawn endgame is a draw here, because not king f7. Yeah, king f7 is fine, and if king d4 I have king e8. Always whenever king e5 comes I need to play king e7. And if king c5, king d7. Just a draw. But I took f takes e6, which is still just a complete dead draw. Rook b7, king g8, rook a7. Now again I have multiple ways. e5 would be immediately a draw, for example. But I played king f8, of course, also completely fine. But somewhere around here I started, for some reason, panicking, because whenever the king goes to e5, especially if it comes to f6, of course it's bad news for me. I have so many ways here, like I could go rook h1, just going after this pawn, but you know, with seconds on the clock you don't want to allow this to happen. Of course here it's a much better version than what I had in the game, and it's quite a simple draw here, but I did not want to allow that to happen. So I played rook f1, king e3, rook e1 check, and his king slowly started approaching. Still so many ways to draw here, of course very, very easy. The easiest way was here, just to play king e7. I don't know why I didn't do that. I had 6 seconds on the clock, so that certainly played a role. After king e7, whenever he goes rook c6, I just play rook a5, and it's just a draw. I played rook b7, after which it becomes difficult. I could also go rook d7 instead, also much easier. Now he plays king d6, and now all of a sudden rook c7 is a threat. And here immediately I blundered. I went rook b4. And then after rook c7, king f8, king to e5, and he's already winning. Here my only chance was to actually give up the e6 pawn, after which it's still a draw. But of course now, especially in Blitz, it becomes more difficult to hold this. So yeah, of course, so many different ways to hold a draw earlier, but it was just the nerves and the time which cost me the game here. And after that, yeah, it was winning. I was even for one moment thinking that I'm able to get this passive defense here with rook f8, but he just has rook b8 check, and this pawn endgame is losing because he's just queening. So that was obviously incredibly painful. It cost me the match then, after all, and just a completely unnecessary way to throw away the match. Yeah, like I defended this game really well, and then to give away the point like this was really painful. And but anyway, let's have a look at the final game of the match, which, as you can imagine, I did not manage to win, and it was also not really a great game, honestly. It really wasn't. So I played d4 again. We repeated the same, and for some reason he did not go for c6 in this game, but for the Rogozin, which was actually what I prepared for this match because it's his main opening. I went for this line, which funnily enough he played in our first game in the classical encounter. Bishop d5, bishop h4. And he played this line with bishop f5. I should have probably gone for the most principled move, queen a4 check here, which forces black to go knight c6. This line is also playable, but it's sort of risky for black, because now the knight on c6 is misplaced. Instead I went a3, e3, knight d7, which anyway sort of transposed to my analysis, at least I thought so. But I guess it doesn't, because in my analysis white took on c3 in those positions, and here he just can go bishop e7, and I don't have any right way to punish that. Maybe I could start with a3, but yeah, that was probably the thing I intended to do. Because now if bishop e7, I can actually go queen b3, and then he doesn't have a great way to defend the pawn on b7. Yeah, but I went e3, knight d7, a3, and here he went bishop e7 and queen b3, and now he's in time to play knight b6, and now he just comfortably equalized. Bishop e2, castle, castle, now c6. I played a4, trying to play a5 next. He went a5 himself, of course. Knight e5. Now rook a7 surprised me a bit, but it's also logical on the other hand, just defending the pawn on b7. Rook a1, knight bd7. Now knight d3 is maybe too passive. I'm curious what the computer gives here. Well, if bishop d3 is the best move already, it's clear that I did not get anything out of the opening here. I was thinking about ideas like f3, but then I thought he could take and go knight d7. It also didn't look great for me, because I'm not in time for any e4. This is just bad for me. If f4, knight c5, knight e4, for example. I went knight d3 back, knight e4, bishop e7, queen takes e7, and here went knight f4, queen b4. And actually this was okay for me, but the problem is just that it's going to be impossible to win the game after that, and in a must-win situation it's difficult. I also have the feeling that I'm already worse here. Rook a1, rook f8, b3. Black needs to act fast here, he needs to play b5, otherwise if I can play rook c1 next, then he's always stuck with this weakness on b4. We played b5. Now I played a5, which was an inaccuracy apparently. Should go f3 first. It's apparently pretty smart, because if he goes bishop c2, I have rook ac1. And if he takes, I can take here and go rook b1. And yeah, this is the line which the computer gives, which apparently is equal, but it also looks pretty nice for black actually, because this pawn could be quite strong, but at least there's some imbalance. I can go knight d3 attacking the pawn here. What happens if he goes bishop h7? Yeah, that's actually pretty good question. He should go for that. Yeah, bishop h7 is just a better move, and still I probably have to give up the pawn like this. At least I'm gonna have a better version. this happened in the game. And now if I go f3, then he already has bishop c2. So rook c1, now g5. Knight h5 was a mistake. Knight d3 I should go, but being in a must-win situation, you don't want to allow those trades, because now if you go something like rook a6, there's probably no way for me to ever win this. So I tried to keep the knights on the board. He played rook a2, bishop d1, rook b2. Yeah, king f8 is better, but I mean he's in a must-draw situation, so it was understandable that he just went for the exchanges here. And here I played g4. Is there any better way for me? I mean, maybe I should bring back the knight immediately. That would have been better, perhaps. But I completely missed his idea that he would actually go for c5. I completely forgot about that, and after that, b3 is also weak. So I'm actually surprised that... No, I was lost at some point later. I thought that it was always a draw. Because I'm just a pawn down here, like already at this point I knew that the match is basically over, because there's just no way for me to win this. I already offered the repetition of moves, which for some reason he declined. Knight e1, king e2, knight g2, knight e3 check, king d4. And now knight takes b4 is a mistake. I should go for king d2 here. I was wondering what happens after this. Maybe I can just go knight to e1. Is that it? I guess so, yeah. Yeah, knight e1 I have to play, but still, it's probably very close for me, to say the very least. So I took here, now it's lost. King c3, knight c6, take, knight d4 check, king c4, knight f5. And here actually I found some pretty nice resource that after knight g5, b2 was a blunder. I mean, blunder to that extent that now it's only a draw. He could have won by going king c2 first, after knight e4 give a check, only then b2 for some reason. I don't know what's exactly the difference here. It's difficult to understand. Because in the game it was like this. Maybe that the king is on e1, yeah? Like also here I was thinking that maybe there's a way for him to win, but the problem is if he brings the knight to c4, for example here, he cannot do that, because once he queens I have knight a3, and I would actually be winning. So, but anyway, for the match, of course, it did not matter at all. A draw for him was sufficient. And yeah, that means with that game, I was knocked out of the World Cup. And as I said in the beginning, it's really an okay result for me. I mean, I think I really put up a great fight in this match. Obviously, it would have been nice to win the match, and I certainly had my chance, especially in the first leg of the tiebreak when I won my first game, and in the second game it looked like I was very close to at least making a draw in that game. But yeah, that's how it is, and I want to conclude this World Cup series by thanking all of you guys for being such a great support. This was really amazing to see all of your comments and support throughout the whole event, and also your appreciation of the recaps. That was always great to see, and it was just a very nice experience for me to be here and being able to show some good chess, I believe. The only thing which was bothering me, that especially in the match against Yangyi, I feel like I was always on the defense in basically all of the games. Even the game I won basically out of the reason that my opponent overpushed. So this is bothering me a little bit, but on the other hand, it shows that I was able to defend some pretty bad positions as well against my formidable opponent. So this is something I'm happy about, and also something I realized during this event, that actually defending is something I can do pretty well in most cases. It's just that also attacking and having an advantage would also be quite a nice thing to do against someone that strong. Anyway, I'm going home the day after tomorrow. So actually, judging by the current time, it's already tomorrow. But on the 8th of November, I have my flight at 2 p.m. So I have the full day tomorrow here. Still, I'm gonna check out all of the games, of course, and go through all of the comments now, which you've commented through the last videos, and hopefully catch up on some sleep, and try to get my nerves back from this experience. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for this great experience which you guys helped me through with in this event, and I'll see you guys soon back when I'm home in Vienna.